Joyce and Crow, and thank you. I'm so grateful to look out and see you have chosen to be here today when in this beautiful weather so many things call to you and there are so many things to choose from, and yet you chose to be here with us today, and I'm very grateful and very humble. I am going to talk about St. Francis today, and it's interesting how the critters seem to know that already. I don't know if you noticed, I was sitting on the front row so I could see. As Joyce was speaking, a little butterfly came in, fluttered around your feet, and then as Crow began to play, she went over and lit in a comfy place close to him and listened very quietly to all that beautiful music. But then when the second piece began, she couldn't stand it anymore, and she began to dance. And she danced all around. Like me, she didn't have quite the stamina to last the whole song, so she found a sunny spot to enjoy the rest of it. And when Mary Brennan came in this morning, she told of an adventure she had yesterday of finding a big black snake in a busy road and stopping to move him, and the adventure that ensued following that. And I began thinking too that even last evening as we were with friends, out of the blue somebody asked, do you think animals have emotions? And I said, well, yes, I do, and I think you need to come to a chapel and listen. He swore he would, but his wife is very dedicated to the Methodist Church, so I guess I'll send you the video. But the creatures know reading. And so my talk I've titled this morning as Beyond the Birdbath, the simplicity of St. Francis. That's my Wren. She's beautiful. 'Tis a gift to be simple. 'Tis a gift to be free. 'Tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in that place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. That is a Shaker hymn, as you are all familiar with. So I'm thinking about St. Francis this morning, and I wonder how many of you have some image of St. Francis either in your garden or in your home, a statue, perhaps a framed prayer, or some other icon that honors this saint. How many of you? Oh yeah, I thought many of you do. Me too. We have had a concrete statue of St. Francis in the last several gardens. He's followed us from move to move, from one house to the next. And the last move was not so kind to St. Francis. Alas, he fell, and his head broke off. And I felt terrible, because I really loved having him in my garden. And the next day, when I was not around, Garnet lovingly glued his head back on. Now, the glue sort of oozed out of the cracks and formed kind of streamers down his humble garments, and it dried into a yellowish color. So now it looks as if he's wearing some sort of ragged yellow scarf around his neck, and still he stands serenely, holding the little bird cupped in his hands. Now you may think of St. Francis as the patron saint of animals, and that he is. But he's more. He's the patron saint of the environment, San Francisco, the Cub Scouts, the tapestry workers. Who knew? And there's a much longer list. And it's customary, as many of you know, in Catholic churches and in the Anglican churches, to hold ceremonies blessing the animals on the day of his feast, which is October the 4th. Now, some quotes about St. Francis enhance this image that we hold. Toward little worms, he even glowed with very great love. He picked them up from the road and placed them in a safe place, lest they be crushed by feet of the passerby. And that is from Thomas of Celano. And also from Thomas of Celano, he rejoiced in all the works of the hands of the Lord, and saw behind things pleasant to behold their life-giving reason and cause. In beautiful things, he saw beauty itself. All things were to him good. And from an early Franciscan and Christian mystic, Bonaventure, let us place our first step at the bottom, presenting ourselves to the whole material world as a mirror through which we may pass over to God. Now, to me, this is a sort of Disney-esque image that lots of us hold in our thoughts of St. Francis. A sort of a male Snow White or Cinderella with the little birds fluttering around him and small creatures gather around his feet, little fawns and bunnies looking up adoringly at his face. You've seen that picture, or you imagine that picture. And while I'm choosing to focus a little more today on the authentic Franciscan spirituality, there is a reason that the images of Francis in the garden with animals took over in art, memory, and poetry. Many seemed to feel that Francis looked more at home in the yard than in the sanctuary, and it seems he often did. In the stories of his life, Francis is talking to or about larks, lambs, rabbits, pheasants, falcons, cicadas, waterfowl, bees, and hooked fish that he tried to throw back into the water whenever it was possible. He also addressed the inanimate parts of creation too, as if they were actually ensouled, which we know this because of his canticle of the creatures, and you're probably familiar with that. He includes in those creatures fire, wind, water, brother sun, sister moon, and of course our sister Mother Earth. This so-called nature mysticism was in fact a worthy first path for Francis, who saw all things in the likeness of God. Footprints and fingerprints that reveal the divine DNA underlying all living links in the great chain of being. Creation itself, not ritual constructed by human hands, or spaces constructed by human hands, was Francis's primary cathedral. Now, he did restore an old church when he founded the friars, which we will talk about a little bit more. But that was his only connection with a physical structure that was and it was certainly not a cathedral. Now I want to tell you too that the Franciscans and their corollary, the Poor Clares, Francis's female companion Clare founded the Poor Clares, which was a very similar organization to the Franciscans. But they did far more than just commune with nature, even though that's our first response when we hear their names. Their work took them into the trenches of the forgotten, the marginalized, the outcasts of society. But here's a brief background to give us the beginnings, perhaps, of a little broader understanding of this 13th century mystic. Francis was born in 1118 in Assisi, Italy. At that time, Europe and the Muslim world had already endured 2 crusades. The 3rd crusade began when Francis was a boy, and the 4th when he was 21. In short, the world was obsessed with war, fear, and security. Assisi itself joined in an ongoing war with Perugia, a neighboring city, and Francis rode off to fight and was taken prisoner by the Perugians in 1202. In 1204, the Christians of the West, let me underscore that, the Christians of the West sacked and looted Constantinople, which we know as modern-day Istanbul. Shortly after that, Francis came out of prison dazed, disillusioned, and feeling that there must be something more than all this cruelty and aggression. Francis seemed to realize that there is an intrinsic connection, and see if you agree, between violence and the need to protect one's possessions, perks, and privileges. His own father was one of the first generation of property businessmen in the new trading class in Europe. One biographer found city records of 12th century Assisi showing that Pietro de Bernardone, Francis's father, was indeed buying up lands of the poor. Francis realized that his father's obsession with money had in many ways destroyed his soul. And so in some ways overreacting to his father, Francis set out on a radically different path. Francis concluded that the only way out of such a world was to live a life of voluntary poverty, or what he called non-appropriation, and to simply not be part of the moneyed class. Franciscans wear a rope around their waist as a sign that they carry no money, since in Francis's time a leather belt also served as a wallet. Francis knew that once you owned anything, you would have to protect it and increase it. And that, it seems, is the nature of greed. There is never enough. Now, for some reason, this is no longer considered a capital sin in our capitalist society. In fact, coveting one's neighbor's goods is the very nature of our society. Today, the need for simplicity goes beyond an avoidance of violence, as Francis understood its purpose. Most of you would agree that our planet is in grave peril, largely due to greed, overconsumption, and reckless exploitation. And while most of us are not like Francis and Claire and willing to dive into voluntary poverty, we must all make choices to do our part to follow these wise words of Mother Elizabeth Seton and Euphrates. Live simply, that others may simply live. Does a gift to be simple? Is a gift to be free? How can simple bring freedom? From Francis's point of view, living simply without the need to accumulate possessions and thus forming what I call ego attachments to them left one to be free of the need to protect those possessions. Francis called this free poverty. So I wanted to think for a moment about what being really poor involves. And my thoughts went back to the Beatitudes spoken by Jesus and reported by Mark. And if you were raised in a Christian tradition, you're familiar with these: blessed are the meek, blessed are the humble, blessed are they that mourn. All of those, blessed are theys. Most of us had to memorize a lot of these, or all of them, in Sunday school long, long ago. But for our purpose today, let's consider blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I have to digress just a little bit. When I was young and learning these, I thought poor in spirit must mean you just didn't have much spirit about you. But I think Francis saw that, interpreted that as another way. And really from a wisdom perspective, that is the point of view of the transformation of consciousness, which most of us seek through meditation, reaching a higher state of consciousness. The poor in spirit designates an inner attitude of receptivity and openness. Your spirit is empty. One is blessed in this state only because it is possible to receive anything. A vessel has to be empty before it can be filled. So the poor in spirit are vessels, empty, and waiting to be filled, and longing to be filled. A Christian mystic, Thomas Merton, and some of you may be familiar with him, wrote, "At the center point of our being is a point of nothingness, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God." From time immemorial, wisdom teaching has insisted that only through that point of nothingness can we enter the larger mind, or the God mind. As long as we're filled with ourselves, our false selves, our ego selves, we can go no further. So from this perspective, poor in heart, those who are blessed, is an open and empty heart, ready and longing to be filled with truth. Francis went beyond voluntary poverty in his effort to find a way out of the world of comparison, competition, and greed, and the violence that he saw that accompanied it. He also felt that he had to live in close proximity to, and even in solidarity with, the excluded ones in his society. If we're not marginalized ourselves in some way, we haven't experienced that. We normally need to associate with some marginalized group to have an enlightened perspective and be converted to compassion. Sort of like you have to walk a mile in the other guy's shoes in order to feel compassion for that person. And Jesus himself taught that quite explicitly. Think of who he ministered to. The marginalized. Where did he minister? Not in the synagogues, but in the streets, in the villages, where the needy, neglected, and forgotten were. Francis was one of the first well-known Christians who followed Jesus' teachings and made them very clear to see. Now, Francis literally changed sides or teams. He was raised in Upper Assisi as one of those who considered themselves the Maoris, or upper class. In the lower part of town lived the minores, or lower class. But Francis even moved down to a plain below Assisi, where there was a leper colony. Now, the word leper generally referred in that time and place to the excluded ones. Lepers did not always have the contagious disease of leprosy. But they were people that society had deemed unacceptable, unworthy, or shameful for any number of reasons. Oh, thank goodness we don't do that anymore. The Franciscans' vision of moving down the social ladder, not identifying with the upper class, nor climbing towards success, power, and money, is utterly countercultural to the worldview of Western society. The Franciscans themselves were to be beggars, which would keep them as humble receivers rather than the typical ecclesiastical consumers and producers. Francis did not want these people in monasteries, sequestered, living off of the church, so to speak. Francis wanted these little brothers. He didn't want these little brothers, that's what he called the friars, to be ordained or given any title in the church. However, Francis was not long in the grave before the church started ordaining as many Franciscan men as possible, who soon wore white Roman stiff collars. Francis must have known, at least intuitively, that there is only one enduring spiritual insight, and everything else follows from it. So if you agree, the visible world is an active doorway to the invisible world, and the invisible world is much larger than the visible. And this is the mystery of incarnation. It is the essential union of the material world and the spiritual world, or simply recognizing the indwelling Christ Spirit. Webster's defines incarnation as the embodiment of a deity or spirit in some earthly form. Somehow Francis and his female companion, Clare, carried this mystery of incarnation to its full and lovely conclusions. Or more rightly, they were fully carried by it. They somehow knew that beyond was not really beyond, but in the depths of here. The joining of the material and spiritual worlds in the present moment. In Franciscan mysticism, there is finally no distinction between sacred and profane. In Franciscan mysticism, there is no distinction between sacred and profane. The whole universe and all events are sacred, serving as doorways to the divine for those who know how to see. In other words, from the Franciscan view, everything that happens and everyone is potentially sacred if allowed to be. And that is St. Francis's contribution. He saw everything and everyone in creation as sacred and lived in a way that others might see this sacredness also. So I'm going to close with the prayer that is sometimes called the peace prayer of St. Francis, though it is not believed to have originated with him. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there's doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. And so it is. Namaste. Hey Joyce, would you like to lead us in our closing song? For those of you who are not usually here, we close with the song "Let There Be Peace on Earth" with our little own version, but sing it any way you know it. We were in a Unity church just a couple of weeks ago, and they too closed with this, except that they had a big screen so that everybody could see the words. Now, we'll get one of those next week, but today we're just going to have to ad lib.